London, 1819. The gossip sheets called it the scandal of the decade. Lady Beatrice Cavendish, the diamond of the season, vanished into the fog of a November night, leaving a viscount at the altar and her reputation in tatters. They said she'd gone mad. They said she'd run off with a beggar. They were wrong. She ran to a man she thought was a penniless soldier with nothing but a scar on his cheek and mud on his boots. She married him for protection, expecting a life of hardship in a leaking cottage. She didn't know that the mud on his boots came from the grounds of the largest estate in Scotland. She didn't know that her poor soldier was the Duke of Inverary, a man worth more than the King of England. And he had a terrifying reason for hiding it. The rain in London did not wash things clean. It merely turned the city into a watercolor painting of greys and blacks. Lady Beatrice Cavendish stood by the window of the drawing room in Grosvenor Square, watching the carriage of Lord Sealer's Wrath pull away. The crest on the door, a striking viper coiled around a sword, seemed to mock her. "He is a good match, Beatrice," her father said, his voice thick with the port he'd been drinking since noon. The Earl of Oakhaven was a man who had crumbled under the weight of his own vices. "He has agreed to settle my debts at White's." "All of them." Beatrice turned, her muslin dress rustling like dry leaves. "He is a monster, father. He beat his first wife. The servants whisper that she did not fall down the stairs. She was thrown." "Gossip," her father snapped, slamming his glass down. "Lord Wrath is powerful. And we are destitute. The auctioneers are coming for the furniture on Monday. You marry him or we starve in the streets of St. Giles." Beatrice looked at her hands. They were trembling. She was 20 years old, with hair the color of roasted chestnuts and eyes that usually held a spark of defiance, but that spark was dimming. Sealer's Wrath had cornered her at the Smythe-Smith musical last week, his breath smelling of stale tobacco, whispering things that made her skin crawl. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a possession. "I will not do it," she whispered. "Then you are no daughter of mine." That night the storm broke. Thunder rattled the windowpanes of the townhouse. Beatrice packed a single leather satchel, 2 practical dresses, her mother's locket, and the small pouch of coins she had saved from her pin money, barely £20. It was enough to get her out of London, but to where? She slipped out through the servants' entrance, the heavy oak door groaning in protest. The cobblestones were slick. She hailed a hackney carriage, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "The docks?" the driver asked, eyeing her cloak. "No," she said, remembering a rumor she'd heard from the scullery maid about soldiers returning from the occupation in France, looking for work or passage north. "Take me to the Anchor, the tavern near Fleet Street." It was a dangerous gamble. The Anchor was no place for a lady. Smoke hung thick in the air, smelling of roasting meat and unwashed bodies. Beatrice kept her hood low. She sat in a dark corner, clutching her reticule. She saw him then. He was sitting alone at a scarred wooden table, nursing a tankard of ale that looked like it had been empty for an hour. He wore a faded red military coat, the gold braiding tarnished and fraying. His boots were scuffed, his dark hair overgrown and curling at the collar. But it was his face that arrested her. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, and a thin, white scar running from his temple to his cheekbone. He looked dangerous. He looked desperate. He looked perfect. A drunken sailor stumbled into her table, knocking her water glass onto her lap. "Well now, what's a pretty little bird doing in a hawk's nest?" The sailor slurred, reaching for her hood. Beatrice froze. Before she could scream, a hand clamped onto the sailor's wrist. It was the soldier. He hadn't stood up. He merely reached across the aisle with a speed that blurred in the candlelight. "Leave the lady be," the soldier said. His voice was a low rumble, with a lilt of the Scottish Highlands buried deep within it. The sailor yelped as the grip tightened. All right, you madman." The sailor scrambled away. Beatrice looked at her rescuer. His eyes were a startling, piercing blue, contrasting with the exhaustion etched into his features. "Thank you," she breathed. "This is no place for you, miss," he said, turning back to his empty tankard. "Go home." "I have no home," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I am looking for a husband." The soldier choked on his ale, or rather, the dregs of it. He looked at her, really looked at her, analyzing the fine cut of her cloak and the desperate set of her jaw. "I think you've mistaken this tavern for Olmac's assembly rooms. The men here can barely afford a loaf of bread, let alone a wife." "I don't need money," Beatrice said, sliding into the chair opposite him. And she lowered her voice. "I have a small inheritance, one that is only released upon my marriage. I need protection. I need to disappear from London. And in exchange..." She hesitated. "In exchange, I can offer you £500. The soldier went still. £500 was a fortune to a common man. It could buy a farm, a business, a new life. He leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in his blue eyes. "And who are you running from, lass?" "The law." "A man," she said. "A powerful man who thinks he owns me." The soldier's expression darkened. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He seemed to debate something internally, a war waging behind those blue eyes. Finally, he sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. "I am Captain Alistair MacGregor," he said. "Retired. Formerly of the 42nd Highlanders. I have nothing to my name but the coat on my back and a ticket on a mail coach to Scotland tomorrow morning." "Scotland is perfect," Beatrice said, feeling a rush of hope. "My name is B. Just B." "Well, just B," Alistair said, extending a calloused hand. If you are willing to marry a poor soldier with a bad temper and no prospects, then we have a deal." The wedding was a hurried, sordid affair at a parish church in Cheapside the following morning. The vicar, a man with spectacles thick as bottle bottoms, didn't ask questions when Alistair placed a ring of twisted copper wire, hastily made from a spare button fastening, onto Beatrice's finger. "I, Alistair, take thee, Beatrice." She flinched when he said her full name. He had seen it on the special license she had procured with a bribe. He knew she was aristocracy, but he hadn't commented on it. When they stepped out into the grey morning, the reality of what she had done crashed down on her. She was married to a stranger. A large, silent stranger who walked with a predatory grace that made passers-by step out of his way. "We leave in an hour," Alistair said. He carried her satchel as if it weighed nothing. "It's a 3-day journey to the border. The coaches are cramped. You won't like it." "I can handle it," Beatrice said, lifting her chin. She couldn't handle it. The journey was a nightmare of mud, aching bones, and the smell of unwashed bodies. They sat squeezed together on the roof of the mail coach because the inside seats were too expensive. The wind whipped Beatrice's hair into a frenzy. But Alistair was surprising. When the rain started, he unbuttoned his heavy red coat and draped it over her shoulders, sitting in his shirt sleeves in the freezing drizzle without a complaint. When they stopped at a roadside inn and there was only one piece of gristly mutton left, he claimed he wasn't hungry and insisted she eat it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him on the second night. They were in a stable loft in York, unable to afford a room. The hay was scratchy, but it was warm. "You have your £500. You could leave me here." Alistair was lying on his back, staring at the rafters. "I gave my word, B. A MacGregor does not break his word, even for a stranger." He turned his head to look at her. In the moonlight, the scar on his face looked stark white. "You aren't a stranger anymore. You're my wife." The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. "Tell me about your home," she asked softly, trying to bridge the gap. "In Scotland." Alistair stiffened. "It's remote. In the Highlands, near Inverary. The land is rugged, hard to farm, it rains more than it shines. A roof that holds most of the water out. It's not what you're used to, my lady." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "I am Mrs. MacGregor now." He let out a short, dry laugh. "Lied. Mrs. MacGregor. God help you." As they crossed the border into Scotland, the landscape changed. The rolling green hills of England gave way to craggy peaks, and sweeping moors turned purple with heather. The air was sharper, cleaner. Beatrice felt the suffocating fear of London beginning to loosen its grip. But she also noticed Alistair's mood shifting. He became more alert, watching the road with a hawk-like intensity. He pulled his hat lower over his eyes whenever they passed other carriages. "Are you in trouble with the law, Alistair?" she teased gently. "Something like that," he muttered. They arrived in the village of Inverary at dusk. It was a picturesque settlement on the edge of a great loch, but Alistair steered them away from the main inn. He led her up a winding, overgrown cart track that climbed steeply into the hills. Beatrice's legs burned. Her silk slippers were ruined. Finally, after an hour of climbing, they broke through the trees. There stood a small, stone crofter's cottage. The roof was thatched and sagging slightly. Weeds grew waist-high around the door. It looked abandoned. "Home," Alistair said, watching her face closely, as if waiting for her to scream or run. Beatrice looked at the desolate little hut. Then she looked back at the road they had come from, the road that led back to Sela's Roth and her father. She took a deep breath, marched up to the door and pushed it open. It creaked loudly. Inside, it smelled of dust and old wood smoke. There was a single room, a cold hearth, and a rough wooden bed frame. "It needs a broom," Beatrice said, turning to him with a tired smile. "And a fire." Alistair stared at her, stunned. "That's it, no tears, no demanding a carriage back to civilization." "I told you, Alistair," she said, taking off his heavy red coat and handing it back to him. "I chose this. Now are you going to chop some wood, husband, or shall I?" Alistair's face softened, a genuine smile breaking through his. Stoicism for the first time. It transformed his face, making him devastatingly handsome. "I'll get the wood, B. 2 months has passed." Life in the cottage was harder than Beatrice could have imagined, but also simpler. She learned to cook porridge over an open fire without burning it. She learned that washing clothes in the icy stream made her hands raw, but the linen smelled like wind and water afterwards. Alistair was a mystery. He would vanish into the woods at dawn and return at dusk with game, venison, rabbit, pheasant. He claimed he was poaching, but he never seemed afraid of the gamekeepers. He was also incredibly educated for a simple soldier. One evening, as Beatrice struggled to read a French novel she had brought with her by the firelight, Alistair recited the passage she was stuck on from memory in flawless Parisian French. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, gaping at him. He poked the fire, avoiding her gaze. "Sometimes." "Don't insult me," he grunted, though his eyes were smiling. They slept in the same bed for warmth, but he never touched her inappropriately. He was a wall of heat against her back, a protector. Yet the tension was growing. There were lingering glances over the dinner table. The accidental brush of fingers when passing a cup. Beatrice found herself watching him chop wood, admiring the play of muscles in his back, the sheer power of him. One afternoon, Beatrice went to the village alone to trade some of Alistair's pelts for flour and sugar. The village of Inverary was bustling. As she stepped out of the general store, a sleek black carriage with gold-spoked wheels rattled down the main street. The villagers stopped and bowed low. Men took off their hats. "Who is that?" "That's the Duke's carriage," the woman whispered reverently. "The Duke of Inverare, though he's rarely seen. They say he's a recluse. Lives up in the big castle across the loch." Beatrice watched the carriage pass. The curtains were drawn tight. She felt a shiver of unease, though she didn't know why. She hurried back up the hill, the sky turning a bruised purple as a storm approached. She took a shortcut through the heavy woods, a path Alistair had warned her against. "There are wolves," he had said. "And worse." She was halfway home when she heard the snap of a twig. Then another. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boots crushing the undergrowth. "Alistair," she called out. No answer. A figure stepped out from behind a massive oak tree. It was not Alistair. It was a man dressed in the livery of a groom, but he held a pistol. And behind him, stepping out from the shadows with a smile that chilled her blood, was a man she knew. Mr. Finch, Lord Sealer's Roth's head of security. A man known for finding people who did not want to be found. "Lady Beatrice," Finch said, tipping his hat. "Your father sends his love, and Lord Roth is most anxious for your return." Beatrice dropped her basket. Flour exploded in a white puff on the forest floor. "I am married," she stammered, backing away. "You cannot take me." "Married to a peasant." Finch laughed. "We checked the parish records. A nobody. Lord Roth has lawyers who can annul such a mistake. Now come quietly, or we shall have to hurt your soldier when he comes looking for you." "No." Beatrice turned and ran. She scrambled up the slope, slipping on wet leaves. Finch and his man were close behind. She could hear their heavy breathing. She crested the ridge and saw the cottage. "Alistair," she screamed. "Alistair." She saw him emerge from the cottage door, an axe in his hand. He looked up, saw her running, saw the men pursuing her. The change in him was instantaneous. He didn't run, he charged. He moved with a terrifying velocity, closing the distance in seconds. "Get inside, B," he roared. Finch raised his pistol. "Stop right there, Plowby, or I'll put a ball in yours." Alistair threw the axe. It wasn't a clumsy throw, it was a precision strike. The axe handle spun through the air and struck Finch's wrist, shattering the bone. The pistol flew into the bushes. Alistair tackled the second man, the groom, hitting him with the force of a cannonball. He disarmed him with two swift, brutal movements that snapped the man's arm and sent him sprawling. Finch was clutching his broken wrist, screaming. Alistair stood over him, chest heaving, his blue eyes burning with a cold, aristocratic fury that Beatrice had never seen before. "Who sent you?" Alistair demanded. His voice wasn't the rough brogue of the soldier anymore. It was the command of a general. "Lord Roth." Finch squealed. "The Earl of Blackwood. He'll kill you." He'll burn this shack down. Alistair grabbed Finch by the lapels and hauled him to his feet effortlessly. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Go back to London. Tell Roth that Lady Beatrice is under the protection of the Clan MacGregor. Tell him if he sends another man to these woods, I will not send him back alive. And tell him... Alistair paused, his eyes narrowing. Tell him he has forgotten who holds the deed to his debts. He shoved Finch away. Run! Finch and the groom scrambled down the hill, terrified. Beatrice stood by the door, trembling. She stared at Alistair. He stood amidst the ferns, the violence radiating off him, yet he seemed completely in control. He turned to her. The rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by concern. He walked to her, reaching out to cup her face. His hands were shaking slightly. Did they hurt you? He asked hoarsely. No, she whispered. She looked at the way he stood, tall, imperious, utterly unafraid of an earl. Alistair, who are you? Really? He looked away, the shadow falling over his face again. I told you. I'm a soldier. A soldier who throws axes like a master and threatens earls about their debts. Beatrice shook her head. You are hiding something. We all have secrets, B, he said softly. I'm keeping you safe. That is all that matters. But we cannot stay here. They know where we are. Where do we go? Alistair looked toward the great lock, toward the distant towers of the castle she had heard about in the village. A strange resignation settled over his features. We have to go to the castle, he said. The Duke's castle, Beatrice asked. Why? Will he help us? Alistair let out a long, ragged breath. He has to. Because I have a key. The rain had turned from a drizzle into a deluge by the time they reached the perimeter of the Inverare estate. Beatrice was soaked to the bone, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely speak. Alistair had wrapped his coat around her again, but the cold of the Scottish Highlands was a living thing, seeking out every weakness. They didn't approach the main gates, where iron lions stood guard atop stone pillars. Instead, Alistair led her along a deer track that skirted the edge of the loch. The massive castle loomed in the distance, a silhouette of turrets and spires blacker than the night sky, punctuated by the glow of 100 windows. It looks occupied, Beatrice said, shouting over the wind. How can we just walk in? The Duke will have guards. The Duke is a man who values his privacy, Alistair shouted back. He keeps a skeleton staff at night. And I know the way the servants use. He led her to a section of the ancient curtain wall that seemed overgrown with ivy. Beatrice watched, shivering, as Alistair reached into the thicket. There was a heavy clunk of metal moving against stone, and a narrow section of the wall swung inward. It was a hidden postern gate, the kind used in centuries past for smuggling or escape during a siege. "Quickly," he urged. They stepped into a stone tunnel that smelled of damp earth and centuries of history. Alistair closed the gate behind them, plunging them into darkness until he struck a flint and lit a torch that sat in a bracket on the wall. The flame illuminated his face, stern, focused, and utterly familiar with his surroundings. "You know this place well for a simple soldier," Beatrice remarked, her suspicion gnawing at her exhaustion. "Did you work here?" "My father worked here," Alistair said shortly. "I grew up running these halls. Watch your step, the flagstones are uneven." They ascended a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever. Finally, they emerged through a panel in the wall into a long, carpeted corridor. The transition was jarring. One moment they were in a cold, damp tunnel. The next, they were surrounded by silk wallpaper, gilded sconces, and the faint scent of beeswax and lavender. Beatrice hugged the rough woolen coat tighter around herself. As she felt small and dirty in such grandeur. "Alistair, we shouldn't be here. If we are caught..." "We won't be caught. Come." He moved with a ghost-like silence, his boots making no sound on the plush runners. He led her not to the servants' quarters, but up the main staircase. Beatrice balked. "The servants' rooms would be downstairs," she hissed. "Where are you taking me?" "To a place where you can be warm," he said. He opened a set of double doors at the end of the gallery. Beatrice stepped inside and gasped. It was a bedchamber fit for a queen. A four-poster bed, draped in blue velvet, dominated the room. A fire was already crackling in the hearth, casting a warm, orange glow over the mahogany furniture. "How?" she whispered. "The fire is lit. The staff prepares this room every night, just in case." "Guests arrive," Alistair said, his back to her as he locked the door. "There are dry clothes in the wardrobe. They might be a bit dated, belonging to the late Duchess, but they will fit. I will go and find food." "Alistair," she called out before he could leave. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. "Yes." "You aren't just a soldier, are you? You aren't just a poacher." She walked toward him, reaching out to touch the sleeve of his shirt. "You walk through this castle as if you own it. Please tell me the truth." He looked down at her, his blue eyes filled with a torment she couldn't understand. For a moment, she thought he would confess. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I am the man who swore to protect you, B. That is the only truth that matters tonight. Get warm. I will return." He slipped out the door, locking it from the outside. Beatrice stood in the center of the opulent room. The heat from the fire began to thaw her frozen limbs, but a chill remained in her heart. She stripped off her ruined dress and opened the wardrobe. Inside were gowns of exquisite silk and lace, smelling of cedar. She chose a simple night rail of white cotton and a heavy velvet robe. She couldn't just sit and wait. The mystery was driving her mad. Alistair had locked the door, but he had underestimated her. The room had a second door tucked behind a tapestry. She pushed it open. It led to a connecting room, a dressing room perhaps. And beyond that, a library. It was a cavernous space, 2 stories high, lined with thousands of books. A single lamp burned on a massive oak desk at the far end. Beatrice crept toward it, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. On the desk lay a stack of letters. The handwriting was bold, aggressive. She glanced at the top one. It was addressed to His Grace, the Duke of Inverare. But it was the letter underneath that stopped her heart. It was unopened, sealed with the crest of a viper coiled around a sword. Sealer's Roth's crest. Beatrice's hands trembled as she picked it up. Why was a letter from her tormentor sitting on the desk of the Duke of Inverare? And why did the handwriting on the open ledger next to it match the handwriting she had seen Alistair use when he wrote out their shopping lists? She looked up. Above the fireplace hung a massive oil painting. It was a portrait of a family. An older man, a stern woman, and 2 young boys. The older boy was standing tall, proud. But the younger boy, he had the same piercing blue eyes, the same stubborn jaw. He was holding a toy soldier. And the plaque beneath the painting read, Alexander and Alistair Campbell, sons of the 8th Duke. Beatrice gasped, stepping back. Her elbow knocked a crystal decanter off the desk. It shattered with a deafening crash. From the shadows of the doorway, a voice spoke. It was deep, resonant, and devoid of the rough soldier's accent she had grown to love. I told you to wait in the room, Beatrice. She spun around. Alistair stood there. He had washed the mud from his face and changed into a crisp white shirt and dark breeches. He looked every inch the lord of the manor. You, she whispered, the betrayal tasting like ash in her mouth. Alistair walked into the light of the lamp. He didn't look like her husband anymore. He looked powerful, imposing, and terrifyingly distant. You are him, Beatrice said, her voice rising. You are the Duke of Inverare. I am, he said simply. You lied to me. For months. You made me sleep in a hovel. You made me scrub floors and eat gruel while you owned this. She gestured wildly around the room. Why? Was it a game? Did you enjoy watching the desperate runaway grovel for your protection? It was no game. Alistair snapped, his composure cracking. He strode toward her, the anguish returning to his eyes. I ran away, Beatrice. Just like you. He stopped a few feet from her, running a hand through his hair. I inherited this title 3 years ago when my brother died. I didn't want it. I was a soldier. I was happy in the regiment. But then the title came, and with it the vultures. Everyone who looked at me saw a purse, a title, a piece of land. No one saw me. He pointed to the scar on his face. And this souvenir from Waterloo. When I returned to society, women swooned, but not in a good way. They looked at the scar with disgust, then looked at my bank account and forced a smile. I couldn't breathe in this house. So I left. I put on my old uniform and went to London to be anonymous. To be invisible. And then you met me, Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. I met a woman who looked at a scarred, penniless soldier and didn't flinch, Alistair said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You offered me £500, everything you had, to save you. You didn't want a duke. You wanted a partner. Do you have any idea how rare that is? For the first time in my life, I was loved for nothing but myself. I trusted you, Beatrice sobbed. I thought we were equals. But you held all the power. The whole time. I was going to tell you, he pleaded. Tonight. I brought you here to tell you. No, Beatrice shook her head, backing away. You brought me here because Finch found us. You brought me here because you had no choice. She felt a wave of nausea. The man she loved, the rough, gentle soldier who chopped wood and held her when she had nightmares, didn't exist. He was a fiction. I am leaving, she said, clutching her robe. I cannot stay here with you. You are my wife, Beatrice. I married Captain Alistair MacGregor. He doesn't exist. He does exist. Alistair roared, slamming his hand on the desk. He is the man who loves you. The title doesn't change my heart, Beatrice. Before she could answer, a heavy pounding echoed through the castle. It was coming from the main doors far below, but in the silence of the night, it sounded like thunder. A moment later, the library doors burst open. An elderly man in a nightshirt, the butler, Henderson, rushed in, looking pale as a ghost. Your Grace. Henderson gasped, bowing hurriedly to Alistair before looking at Beatrice with wide eyes. Forgive the intrusion. But there are men at the gate. Magistrates. And a lord from London. Alistair went rigid. The emotional vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold, hard steel of the soldier. Roth. He says he has a warrant, Your Grace, Henderson stammered. He claims you are harboring a fugitive. He has the local sheriff with him. They are demanding entry. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Sealer's Roth was here. He had followed them. He will take me, she whispered, terror seizing her throat. He has the law. I am a runaway. He'll say I stole from my father. Alistair turned to her. The lie was over. The game was done. He walked over to her, not as the poor soldier, but as the Duke. He took her hands in his. His grip was iron. "He will take nothing," Alistair said. "Henderson, wake the footmen. Light the lamps in the great hall. All of them. Open the main gates." "Your Grace," Henderson asked, confused. "You heard me," Alistair commanded. "If Lord Roath wants an audience, let us give him one." He looked at Beatrice. "You asked who I was, Beatrice. You asked if I was the soldier or the Duke." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Tonight I have to be the Duke. It is the only way to save you. Will you stand with me? Not as a fugitive, but as the Duchess of Inverary." Beatrice looked into his eyes. She saw the deception, yes. But she also saw the fierce protectiveness she had come to rely on. She saw the man who had thrown an axe to save her life. Roath was outside, a monster who wanted to destroy her. Alistair was here, a man who had lied to be loved, but who was now offering her the ultimate shield. As she took a deep breath, straightening her spine. She was a Cavendish. She would not cower. "I have nothing to wear," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Alistair smiled, a dangerous wolfish smile. "Henderson, wake the maids. Get her Grace the emerald silk. And bring me my family sword." The great hall of Inverary Castle was a cavern of shadows and flickering torchlight. Suits of armor stood like silent sentinels along the walls, and the banners of the Clan Campbell hung motionless from the high vaulted ceiling. Lord Sealer's Roath strode into the hall, his boots echoing sharply on the stone floor. Behind him scuttled the local sheriff, a man named Mac Tavish, who looked terrified to be invading the Duke's home, and two burly magistrates from London holding warrants. "Where is he?" Roath demanded, his voice echoing. "Where is the coward who thinks he can steal my property?" "Your property!" A voice boomed from the shadows at the top of the grand staircase. Alistair descended slowly. He wore formal evening dress, a black velvet coat, a pristine white cravat, and the tartan sash of his clan pinned at his shoulder with a silver brooch. He moved not with the hurried aggression of a soldier, but with the lazy, terrifying confidence of a predator in his own territory. Roath squinted. "You, the soldier from the woods. You cleaned up well, Ploughboy. But clothes do not make the man." He turned to the sheriff. "Arrest him for kidnapping and assault." "I would be careful, Lord Roath," Alistair said, reaching the bottom step. "You are trespassing." "I have a warrant." Roath waved the paper. "For the arrest of Lady Beatrice Cavendish, a runaway and a thief. She stole family heirlooms. And for you, sir, for harboring her." "She is not Lady Beatrice Cavendish," Alistair said calmly. "Don't play games with me." Roath snarled. "I know she is here." "She is Her Grace, the Duchess of Inverary," Alistair corrected, his voice dropping to a silken whisper that carried across the hall. "And you will address her as such." Roath froze. A confused smile twisted his lips. "Duchess, you are mad. She married a beggar." "She married me," Alastair said. Before Roth could process this, the heavy oak doors at the top of the stairs opened. Beatrice stepped out. She was breathtaking. The emerald silk gown fit her perfectly, accentuating her figure. Diamonds, the famous Inverare heirlooms, glittered at her throat and ears. Her hair was swept up in an intricate knot, exposing the graceful curve of her neck. She descended the stairs, her chin held high, her eyes locking onto Roth with a cold disdain she had never possessed before. Roth's mouth fell open. The sheriff took off his hat and bowed low, trembling. "My wife," Alastair said, stepping to Beatrice's side and taking her hand. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving Roth's face. This is a trick," Roth stammered, his face flushing purple. "You cannot be the Duke. The Duke is a recluse, a cripple, a ghost." "I assure you, I am quite flesh and blood," Alastair said dryly. "Sheriff MacTavish, please inform Lord Roth who I am." "He is His Grace, the 9th Duke of Inverare," the sheriff squeaked. "Peer of the realm. Master of the household." Roth looked from Alastair to the sheriff, the realization dawning on him like a physical blow. He had not been chasing a pauper. He had been hunting the wife of one of the most powerful men in Britain. But Roth was a man of malice, and malice does not yield easily. He sneered, recovering his composure. "Very well. So she married a duke. It matters not. She is still a thief. She stole jewelry from her father before she fled. That warrant is valid. I can drag her to London in chains, Duchess or not." Beatrice squeezed Alastair's hand, fear flickering in her eyes. Alastair laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. "You speak of debts and theft, Roth. Let us speak of your debts." Alastair snapped his fingers. Henderson, the butler, stepped out from the shadows, holding a silver tray. On it lay a stack of documents tied with black ribbon. "What is this?" Roth asked, eyeing the papers. "These," Alastair said, picking up the bundle, "are your promissory notes. Your gambling debts at White's. Your mortgages on your estate in Kent. Your outstanding loans to the Bank of England." Roth paled. How did you get those?" "I bought them," Alastair said simply. "All of them. Every single pound, shilling, and penny you owe to anyone in this world, you now owe to me." He took a step closer to Roth, the papers rustling in his hand. "I own your house, Roth. I own your horses. I own the clothes on your back. If I were to call in these debts tonight, which I am very inclined to do, you would be in Fleet Prison by sunrise." Roth staggered back, defeated. The power dynamic had shifted so violently it left him dizzy. He looked at Beatrice, then at Alastair, seeing the steel wall of their unity. "What do you want?" Roth whispered. Alistair tossed the bundle of debts into the fireplace. The papers caught the flames, curling and blackening in seconds. "I want you to leave," Alistair said. "I want you to forget the name Beatrice Cavendish ever existed. And if I ever see your face in Scotland again, I will not be as merciful as I was in the woods." Roth looked at the fire, watching his fortune burn. He looked at Beatrice one last time, a mixture of hatred and awe, before turning on his heel and marching out into the night, the magistrates trailing behind him like whipped dogs. The heavy doors slammed shut. Silence returned to the great hall. The heavy oak doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the cavernous space of the great hall, vibrating in the soles of Beatrice's shoes. The sound marked the end of the threat, the end of Sela's Roth, and the end of the life she had known. For a long moment, silence reigned. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the crackle of the logs in the massive stone hearth and the distant, rhythmic drumming of the rain against the high stained glass windows. The adrenaline that had sustained Beatrice through the confrontation began to ebb away, leaving her limbs feeling heavy and her skin prickling with a cold sweat. The servants, sensing the volatile atmosphere between their master and his wife, melted away into the shadows. Henderson, the loyal butler, gave a stiff bow and quietly ushered the footmen toward the kitchens, closing the service door with a soft click. Beatrice and Alistair were alone. She stood in the center of the hall, the emerald silk of her gown feeling foreign and heavy against her skin. She looked at the man standing by the fireplace. He was turned away from her, staring into the dying flames where a fortune in debts had just turned to ash. In his velvet coat and starched cravat, with the firelight dancing off the silver brooch at his shoulder, he looked every inch the Duke of Inverary. He looked powerful. He looked magnificent. He looked like a stranger. Beatrice took a breath, the air in the hall tasting of beeswax and old wood smoke, so different from the peat and damp earth of the cottage. "You bought his debts," she said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the storm of emotions raging within her. "All of them. That must have cost a king's ransom." Alistair didn't turn immediately. His shoulders, usually so broad and unyielding, seemed to slump under an invisible weight. "It was money, Beatrice. Just gold and paper. It was pocket change compared to your safety. I would have burned the castle down if it meant keeping him away from you. But you lied to me, Alistair." The words hung in the air, sharper than the axe he had thrown in the woods. He turned then, and the look on his face stopped the breath in her throat. The imperious mask of the Duke was gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability she had never seen, not even in their darkest moments of hunger. "I know," he said hoarsely. "You let me believe we were destitute," Beatrice said, her voice rising as the shock gave way to a searing hurt. She took a step toward him, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "You let me worry about where our next meal would come from. You watched me scrub the floor of that cottage until my hands were raw and bleeding. You watched me cry over a ruined pot of porridge because I thought we couldn't afford more oats. And all this time, you were this. She gestured wildly around the hall, at the tapestries that were likely older than her family line, at the crystal chandelier that caught the light of 100 candles. Was it a test? She demanded, tears stinging her eyes. Did you want to see if the spoiled London lady could survive in the mud? Was I just amusement for you? No, Alistair flinched as if she had struck him. He strode toward her, closing the distance but stopping just out of reach, as if he didn't dare touch her. God, Beatrice, never think that. It was never a game. It was survival. For my soul. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the perfect grooming. When I came back from Waterloo, I was broken. I had this scar on my face and blood on my hands. But all society saw was the title. They saw the Duke. They saw the fortune. He began to pace, his agitation palpable. I was surrounded by people, yet I had never been more alone. Women smiled at me, but their eyes were calculating the size of my estate. Men shook my hand while plotting how to use my influence in Parliament. I was a prize to be won, Beatrice. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a bank account with a pulse. He stopped and looked at her, his blue eyes burning with intensity. Then I walked into that tavern. I was dirty. I was rude. I looked like a vagrant. And you didn't look away. Beatrice felt a lump form in her throat. She remembered that moment in the tavern clearly, the way he had looked so dangerous and yet so sad. You offered me everything you had. Alistair whispered, stepping closer. £500. Your entire future. You offered it to a scarred soldier for his protection. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care about the title. You trusted me. Alistair. The man, not the Duke. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm before dropping back to his side. I was terrified, B. I was so terrified that if I told you the truth, if I brought you here too soon, the magic would break. You would look at me the way everyone else does. You would see the castle, the jewels, the power. And I would lose the only person who ever looked at me and just saw a man. Beatrice looked at him. Really looked at him. She looked past the velvet coat and the silk cravat. She saw the tension in his jaw. She saw the scar that ran down his cheek, the mark of his service, the mark of his pain. She realized suddenly that the man standing before her wasn't a stranger at all. He was the same man who had wrapped his coat around her in the rain. He was the same man who had held her when she had nightmares about her father. He was the man who had eaten less so she could eat more. The money hadn't changed him, it had only hidden him. But the deception still strung. I would have loved you anyway, she whispered. You didn't have to test me. I wasn't testing you, he said softly. I was hiding from myself. I wanted to be Alistair MacGregor for just a little while longer. Because Alistair MacGregor had you. The Duke of Inverary has nothing but empty rooms and cold responsibilities. He took a deep breath, straightening his spine. The vulnerability vanished behind a wall of resignation. He looked at her with a solemn, heartbreaking dignity. But I have wronged you. I trapped you in a marriage under false pretenses. I made you live in squalor when I could have given you the world. He walked to a small writing desk near the staircase and picked up a piece of parchment. I will not hold you to a vow made to a ghost, he said, his voice void of emotion. I will grant you an annulment, Beatrice. My lawyers can have the papers drawn up by morning. I will settle a generous income on you, enough that you will never have to fear men like Roth or your father again. You can leave Scotland. You can go to Paris or Italy. You can be free. Beatrice stared at him. He was offering her an out. He was giving her the freedom she had run away from London to find. She could walk away now, rich and independent, with no master and no husband. It was everything she had thought she wanted when she fled her father's house. But as she looked at him standing there, waiting for her judgment like a condemned man, she realized that freedom wasn't about being alone. It was about choosing where you belonged. She looked at the grand staircase. She looked at the cold stone walls. And then she looked at his hands, the large, capable hands that had saved her life twice. Is that what you want? She asked quietly. Do you want me to leave? Alistair closed his eyes for a brief second, a spasm of pain crossing his features. No. He breathed. I want my wife. I want the woman who ran into the woods to save me when she should have been running for her life. I want to wake up beside you every morning and know that you are there because you choose to be, not because you have nowhere else to go. Beatrice walked toward him slowly. The sound of her silk skirts was a whisper in the quiet hall. She stopped inches from him. She could smell the faint scent of pine and rain that always clung to him beneath the expensive cologne of the Duke. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the white line of the scar on his cheek. He leaned into her touch, his eyes fluttering shut, his defenses crumbling. You foolish, stubborn man. As she murmured, do you really think I fell in love with a cottage or a soldier's coat? He opened his eyes, hope warring with fear in their blue depths. I fell in love with you, Alistair, she said firmly. I fell in love with your bravery, with your kindness, with the way you protect what is yours. Those things don't disappear just because you put on a velvet coat. She smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest, melting the last of the anger. Although, she added, her voice lightening, I must admit, the velvet coat is a significant improvement over that dreadful red tunic. Alistair let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. It was a ragged sound, half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her tightly, as if he were the one being saved. "I am so sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I swear it." Beatrice rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She was safe. Truly, finally safe. Not because of the castle or the title, but because of the man who held her. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes, the same spark of defiance that had caught his attention in the tavern all those months ago. "You can start making it up to me right now," she said. "Name it," Alistair said, ready to give her the moon if she asked for it. "Anything." "A hot bath," she declared. "With actual hot water. And soap that doesn't smell like lye. And then a real dinner. Roast chicken. Potatoes. Wine. I have had quite enough of porridge to last me a lifetime." Alistair laughed. It was a rich, genuine sound that filled the cavernous hall, chasing away the shadows and the ghosts of the past. It was the sound of a man who was no longer alone. "As you wish, my lady," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "As you wish." He didn't call for a servant. Instead, he swept her up into his arms, lifting her effortlessly. Beatrice gasped and wrapped her arms around his neck, laughing as he carried her toward the grand staircase. He carried her not as a duke carrying a duchess, but as a husband carrying his wife, with strength, with joy, and with an infinite, enduring love. Outside, the storm finally broke. The heavy clouds parted, revealing a brilliant full moon that cast a silver path across the waters of the loch. The darkness had passed. The Duke and his Duchess were home. So that is the scandal they whisper about in London to this day. Lady Beatrice didn't just marry a soldier, she married a legend. She found the one thing money cannot buy, a love that was tested in poverty and forged in fire. She saved him from his loneliness, and he saved her from her cage. They say if you go to Inverary, you can still see their portraits side by side, the Duke with his scar, and the Duchess with a smile that says she knows a secret the rest of the world can only guess at. If this story of secrets, betrayal, and undying love captured your heart, please don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel. What would you have done if you found out your partner was secretly a billionaire? Let me know in the comments below. And for more breathtaking historical romances and dramatic tales, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.